everyone, Aisha here. So today I wanted to talk about the story about the 60-year-old Wells Fargo employee who died at her desk at work, but she was found 4 days later. So she clocked into work, sat at her desk, died at some point, and she just sat there for 4 days before someone noticed it. And so that is insane. Number one, that she was not noticed for 4 days. But there were two major issues that I noticed in this story that I didn't see a lot of people talking about. And so I wanted to talk about those things today. And so the two major issues that I saw were, number one, her job and her coworkers didn't notice. Like, that, number one, is problematic. But the second thing is that her family didn't notice. And I'm going to go into why this is important. And so, number one, as I started to think about this story, there were a couple of things that I remembered. I remembered a story that my mentor had shared, and she was an executive in a company, and she worked a whole lot of hours. And so that work was really burning her out, causing her a lot of stress, and to the point where she ended up having a stroke. And after she had that stroke, she was hospitalized. And when her employer found out that she was alive, that she could still function, and that her brain wasn't damaged, they boxed up the work that was on her desk and shipped it to the hospital and said, we just are doing you a favor so that way you don't fall behind. And so when she saw that, she was completely like, what in the world? Like, no asking, no giving her a break, no recognition that it was the workplace stress and the workload that caused this health event to happen. And so she ended up telling that person to take that back and send her retirement papers, and she was done, right? The second story I want to share with you is I remember a number of years ago seeing a story about a man who had died. And so before the funeral even happened, his job was actually reposted, and they were already looking for somebody to backfill his job. And then I remember this other story. This was a while ago. Back when I used to work in retail. And so there was a lady who I worked with at the time, and she was a longtime employee of this company. And so I don't remember all the circumstances or anything. This was a long time ago, but I just remember that she had died. And so after she died, people were like, talking about like all the great things about her and everything. And so they ended up even putting up this little plaque at the workplace. And so years later, I ended up going back to that place, just stopping in, and I noticed that the plaque was gone. And it was just so interesting to me how back then, like, they made a big deal about this, it was tragic and everything, but years later, it was like she never was there. And as I was thinking about that one particular story, as I thought about what happened to this Wells Fargo lady, it reminded me, not to compare her to Joseph, but just to talk about how fleeting some of this stuff is, and how people can remember you one time and then not remember you another time. But it just reminded me of, it said, there came a day, a Pharaoh who didn't remember, things of what Joseph had did. And so, and I'm not comparing her to Joseph in any way, shape, or form, but just saying this in the sense of, people can appreciate you one day and totally forget about you another day. People can, commend you for the work that you're doing and then forget you another time. And so it caused me to start to think about even my own career in corporate finance. And so back when I was in corporate finance, I had a lot of major projects that I was working on and all of this good stuff. But then I ended up dealing with workplace bullying, and dealt with workplace bullying for about 2.5 years. And so towards the end of that 2.5 years, I started to be like, you know what, I can't deal with this anymore. And my doctor told me to go on FMLA or quit. And it was initially hard for me to even think about leaving that job or quitting that job, because initially it had been my dream job. I had graduated from grad school and ended up in a job in my field, making, great money, being able to work on projects that were cool. But then things changed after about 4 years or so, and it just wasn't the same. And so I was miserable. And so when I was starting to think about leaving or transferring to a different department, I was just like, but what about the projects that I'm working on? Like, who's going to take that over? And I remember my mentor gave me this advice, and it was very powerful. It was profound at the time, something I didn't necessarily want to hear, but something that I needed to hear. And what he said is that if you think about a rock being thrown into water, right? He said, have you ever thrown a rock into a body of water? I said, yeah. And he says, so when the rock hits the water, it creates this ripple effect. And so eventually, there are big ripples, but the farther you get out from the rock being thrown and where it impacted the water, the ripples are a little bit less. But if you keep watching over time, eventually the surface of the water will be smooth, as if the rock was never thrown there, and you would never know that the rock was thrown into the water. And so he said, you might be working on some really important projects right now. You might even be making a big contribution to the company right now. But he said, when you leave, the job is going to replace you. And initially, when you leave, it's going to be like a ripple effect, but it would eventually be like you were never there. And that was very sobering to me. He wasn't saying this to be mean. He was saying this to say, you know what? If your doctor is telling you to go on FMLA or quit because of the stress and the bullying that's impacting your health, you need not be concerned about the projects. Leave in a way with integrity, but don't feel bad about choosing your health, because what they're going to do is they're going to rehire, give your work to someone else, and eventually it'll be like you were never there, because they are going to continue on. So don't sacrifice your health. Don't sacrifice your well-being. Don't sacrifice your mental health for a job that is ultimately just going to replace you. So that's what he was saying, right? And I listened to that advice and eventually left that job, and eventually went somewhere else, and just to be able to protect and preserve my mental health. But I say that to you, right? Because I had a terrible boss at the time, right? But as I was thinking about this, I also wanted to share this with those of you who might have a good boss, who might work with good coworkers, because really the same is true. And there are plenty of good bosses. There are plenty of bosses who love and care about their employers. There are plenty of coworkers who are amazing and who are great. But the same is true. When someone leaves that company, the rock analogy still holds. The rock is there. There's a ripple effect where somebody is getting used to that person's absence. But over time, the work is redistributed, and it's like that person was never there. And it's not mean, right? Because the function of an organization, or the function of a ministry, or the function of a nonprofit, in order for it to continue, it's not meant to be wholly dependent on one person, right? Even if you think of ministry, think about the ministries that are lasting, right? Billy Graham's ministry is still going. Derek Prince's ministry is still going. These people have long gone to be with the Lord, but the work of their ministry is still going, because they realize that in order for that work to continue, it had to be more than just about them. And that's just what that rock analogy is saying. So what does this mean? What we can learn from this is that we need to be able to prioritize our family and our God-ordained relationships, because these are the things that are lasting. And there are so many people, and I'm not judging them, right, who have sacrificed these things for success, sacrificed these things for work, sacrificed these things for their, for things that impact, sacrifice their well-being and their health for their job and their career. But when they no longer had those things, because they sacrificed the things that were truly lasting, when they no longer had their career, what happened is they left behind a trail of broken relationships, broken family relationships, and some people even broken health. And it's not worth it. I remember I was talking to another one of my mentors after I became a mom. And at that time, I was so focused on ministry, so focused on the work that I'm doing with, my book, Navigating the Impossible, right? So focused on this, so focused on a lot of just things related to ministry and being able to encourage single moms, encourage women who've experienced unplanned pregnancies. And it was impacting the time that I was spending with my children. And I was kind of like, okay, wait, because, I got to do this call, or I got to do this YouTube video, or I have to, go do this thing, right? And so one of the things that my mentor, and she was just really discipling me in the Word of God at the time, she challenged me to have a heart bent towards home. And she said, I understand that you work full time. I understand that you're a single mom. I understand that, there are situations that exist in your life where you're going into the office, like you're working, and you're doing all of these things. But she said that even with that, you can still have a heart based on home. And what she meant is that even if you're working out of the office, even if you have to travel, you can have this desire to be with home, meaning that in your spare time, you're focused on home. You're looking at, if you're at work, you're looking at, okay, so how can I get home faster? Like, how can I spend more time with my children? How can I maximize the time that I have with my kids? So even if you work full time, then you're like, okay, how can I, spend more time with my kids when I get home? How can I control my schedule a bit more that would allow me to have more free time so I can spend it with my family? Who can I say no to in order to be able to say yes to being able to spend more time with my children? Right. And those were the things that she helped me to be able to see. And she challenged me to be able to think about this. And so I realized that what I was doing, it was good. Right? It was good. It was impactful. It had meaning, but it was coming at the expense of spending that time with my children. And I was kind of angry at first. I was just like, don't you know that, like, God is calling me to this, right? But I realized, and I'm like, don't you realize that I have ambition, dreams, and things like this that I want to pursue? Don't you know that I want to be able to give God the glory and to be able to, help the women that God has called me to help? But after I thought about it a little bit more, I realized that she was right. I realized she was right. And actually Mark 8 verse 36 says, what does it profit for a man to gain the whole world but lose his soul? Matthew 6 verse 21 says, where your, what does it say? It says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also, right? And if you think about what is treasure is like, your time, your money, the things that you're focusing on. And so where you're spending all of that is revealing where your heart is. And so if you have a heart that is bent towards home, you're focusing on your kids, you're focusing on the things, that on those relationships, right? You're putting your heart is there. So that is where your treasure is, right? And so I realized that my heart actually needed to change. My children are my first ministry. So after my relationship with God, my children needed to be first, right? And I'm speaking about this biblically. So of course, if you're married, your order would be a little bit different because God calls you to have him first, then your spouse, and then your kids. But for me as a single mom, it's God first and then my kids, right? And so after that correction from my mentor, I began to make some changes and I started to reevaluate what I said yes to. I started to reevaluate the things that were pulling me away from my children. And at one point, I actually resigned from every single board that I was on because I realized that what I was doing is I was spending so much time in board meetings and doing these different things, which were good because I was doing good work for the community, but it was taking me away from my kids. And so in an effort to reclaim my time, I resigned from every single board that I was on. And I sought God's direction on what he wanted for this season of my life. I took breaks from ministry. I even took breaks from, contributing to my YouTube channel more frequently. I took breaks from certain things that, even events that I would go to, because I wanted to be able to be present more with my kids. And then one of the other things is, as I began to reevaluate what I said yes to, I started to ask myself, is this something I can do with my kids? Right? If I'm going to go volunteer, can I bring my kids and allow them to reevaluate, volunteer with me? And one of the other things too is, when you're at work with a heart towards home, what you can do is, if you're at work and you think about your kids at work, if you have the time, or if they're not in school, you can call them and check on them. Or if you're not able to do that, just pray for them, right? That is having a heart bent towards home. But the other thing is it required me to be able to unlearn a lot of things. And so one of the things about feminism, and I really consider myself a hardcore feminist for a lot of time, but I don't anymore, because I believed through that teaching that I had to prioritize work over everything, that my ambition trumped family. And I just realized that it wasn't true. And I believed that the work outside of home was more valuable than the work done inside the home. And I remember reading this one article, and this article was written by a prominent feminist who I really admired. And it like, reading that article was like really upsetting. And that was one of the things that really triggered me, just being like, you know what, I no longer believe in this view anymore. Not to say that, I don't believe in, equal work, equal pay. I mean, I believe in those obvious things, but the overall feminism, I just could no longer identify with, because I felt that so many of the things that were taught, that at least I believe, were actually harmful. And I had to unlearn this once I became a mom. And so, but in particular, this article said that, women who are stay-at-home moms are hurting women in general, because they're not doing their part to shatter the glass ceiling. And for me, I was like, well, wait, I thought the whole thing about feminism, it was for women to be able to choose if they work in the house or if they work in the home. But now it's about shaming women who choose to stay at home and prioritize being at home, and that's not right. And I was just like, no, I can't do this, because I had believed that I needed to be outside the home. I believed that I needed that what I was doing outside of that was more valuable, and it wasn't. Right? It wasn't. Yes, it was impactful, but it wasn't more important than my children. And I just was unwilling to make that sacrifice or make that trade. And the second thing I needed to unlearn was that doing ministry means prioritizing the work of ministry over family. And that, I think, is really dangerous, especially within the Christian context, because there's a number of Christians who are ministers, who are doing great work, who are prioritizing the work of ministry at the expense of their family, and their kids don't even know them. I actually have a friend of mine who, I remember, she said her mom was like a church mother, and her mom would be, whenever somebody needed someone to show up to pray or serve, her mom was always the first one. But she would leave her daughter and go do ministry outside the home. And what happened was, her daughter eventually grew very cold to the faith, because she looked at her mom's position in the church and what she was doing in ministry is taking away from her. And I've heard that story over and over again from people who are doing the work of ministry. But ministry does not mean prioritizing the work of ministry over your family. And what I had to realize personally is that ministry means raising my kids. My kids are my first ministry. Ministry starts in the home, right? And so I say this, if you are somebody who is in ministry with kids, do the work of God, but be also sensitive about his timing and his guidance in the seasons. Sometimes we're called to take a step back. Sometimes we're called to serve in ways that allow us to bring our kids along with us. Sometimes we're called to serve outside of the house, so be sensitive to that. The other thing that I had to unlearn was focusing on always hitting the next goal. And what that means, be okay with the detours in life, or if things aren't moving as fast as, for me, what I thought that they should look like. And not to get so caught up in the destination that I missed the journey. And that's one thing that I was doing. I was so caught up with, okay, I hit this goal. Now I need to hit this next goal. Now I need to hit this next goal. And I remember one time somebody told me, she said, have you ever taken the time to actually celebrate hitting a milestone? And I was like, no, not really, because I wanted to be able to hit the next one. But just that encouragement to be able to slow down, to be able to say, you know what? It's okay to celebrate hitting that goal and not being in such a rush to hit the next goal. That helped me to also be able to slow down and to be able to refocus and to be able to find some balance in my life, and also to appreciate the journey. The fourth thing is that I needed to learn is a thought that money would solve all my problems. And so there is absolutely nothing wrong with making money. The people misquote the Bible when it says, and people try to say that the Bible says that money is the root of all evil. And what it says is the love of money is the root of all evil, not money in general. Money in general isn't evil, and it allows people to do really good things and to be able to invest in ministry and to be able to, do the work of God. But at the same time, I think that we can also focus on it more than we should. And we can work so hard that we miss spending time with our children. So yes, it is true. There is inflation. Grocery costs are sky high. Gas costs are through the roof. And student loan payments are what they are. And some of these things may be stressing your budget, but we have to remember that God is our source. And there are times where I made the decision to spend more time with my kids, knowing that it would impact my income, but it was worth it to me. And I really got that revelation because before I was spending so much time prioritizing money and being able to make the money and doing all those things, that it was not only impacting my health, but it was impacting the time that I can spend with my children. The fifth thing that I had to unlearn was that saying, rest when you're dead. Like, that is a lie. No, rest now. And if you research the Sabbath in the Bible, you will see that the Sabbath was given to us as a gift. Rest is a gift, and rest doesn't have to just be sleep or taking naps or, things like that. It can be unstructured time to just relax, just be, and be present with your children. Call or visit friends or family and speak to and pour into good and godly friends. The sixth thing that I had to unlearn was that ministry and family are separate. And I wanted to look for ways to involve my kids in the ministry with the work that I'm doing, so that they can learn how to build up the kingdom of God. Right. And I think that these were just all things that, as I saw that story about that Wells Fargo lady who died at work and no one noticed for 4 days. And the fact that not only did her coworkers not notice, not only did her employer not notice, but her family didn't even notice. And that was the thing that really shook me the most, is that if someone can pour that much into work, into a career, to the point where she was dead for 4 days and no one in her family noticed. And this is why I really wanted to get in here and talk about why it's important to be able to build up these relationships with their family, build up these relationships with true, good friends, because these are really the things that matter, right? And also your relationship with God. And so in closing, I really encourage you to read the lyrics to the song Cat's Cradle. And that book is by, not book, but that video, no, the song is by this man called Harry Chapin. So definitely go in and look up Google the lyrics for that song, Cat's Cradle, because it will, as a mom, right, and even as a single mom, I think that we can get so focused on providing, we can get so focused on what we have to do in order for the day to go the way it needs to, in order for us to be present and to be able to do and just take care of our kids, that it's easy to lose focus. and the things that we have to do. It's easy to lose focus and get distracted by work. It's easy to get focused in on the to-do list, right? But we need to be able to take a step back and prioritize that time with our children and with our family. And so just as an overall thing, just like quick overall thing, is that Cat's Cradle by Harry Chapin is about a man who was so busy with work that whenever his son wanted to play with him, he never had time, right? But his son, he kept saying, his son understands, was like, okay, Dad, I get it. Like, you're busy. You had to do this. So the son would go do something else. Just totally understanding, right, what the dad had going on in his life. But eventually the son grows older. Eventually the son, and the son was never like upset or anything. The son understood it, right? But eventually the son moved off, went away to college, grew up, and had kids of his own. And so the dad was long retired. The dad finally retired. He had time. And so the dad was like, okay, now that I'm retired, now it's time to be able to hang out and play. And the son was like, oh, too busy, Dad, too busy, Dad, too busy, Dad. Got work going on, got all this stuff, got all this running around. And so the dad thought that he could put off that time. And finally, when he was done doing everything that he needed to do, when he was done accomplishing all his goals, when he was done meeting the things that he wanted to do, when he finally had that accomplished, now his son was grown and didn't have time for him because his son was repeating in the same footsteps, right? And so I really encourage you to read that. It was really sad, actually, but I don't want that to happen to any of us. I don't want that to happen to you. I don't want that for my life. And so this is why I think that it's really important to focus on family. Evaluate the things that you have believed in life that had taken you away from family, from good. And this is like, of course, assuming you have healthy relationships. And I'm talking about in the context of spending that time with your kids, healthy people in your family, good friends, building up yourself in the Word of God, in the Bible and things like that. That's why it's so important to be able to focus on these things, because some of the other stuff isn't lasting. It just really isn't. And so don't be like, I mean, I don't know anything about this Wells Fargo lady, so I'm not going to finish that sentence. But make sure that you're living a life that matters. Make sure that you're valuing the relationships that you have in your life, and make sure you're prioritizing your relationship with God. And so again, I just want to encourage you to grab a copy of the book, Navigating the Impossible, a survival guide for single moms from pregnancy through the first year of motherhood. It is available on Amazon. And even in this book, I talk about finances, managing your finances properly. And so talk about building your relationship with Christ. It's just so much things in here that even if you aren't in your first year of motherhood, it will still be a blessing to you. Or if you know a single mom who's pregnant or in her first year of motherhood, you can always pick up the book for her as a gift. And that is on Amazon. So I hope you liked this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something from it. Drop me a comment and let me know how this has impacted you. Please share this with a friend. Make sure you subscribe to my channel over on YouTube. It is Aisha J. Taylor. Yeah. And that is it. Oh, and hit subscribe as well. Alrighty. Have a good one. Bye.